The night is moonless over the Ionian Sea. 21 obsolete biplanes, their fabric wings straining against the Mediterranean wind, drone toward the most heavily defended naval base in Europe. Their target, the pride of Mussolini's fleet, 6 battleships lying at anchor in Taranto harbor. Their weapon, torpedoes that shouldn't work in water this shallow, their odds astronomical. Yet in the next 2 hours, these ancient aircraft will achieve what no surface fleet could accomplish: sink more battleships in a single night than Nelson did at Trafalgar, and write the tactical blueprint for history's most infamous naval attack. This is the story of Operation Judgement, the night 21 British biplanes changed naval warfare forever, November 1940. The war has been raging for over a year, and Britain stands alone. France has fallen. The Wehrmacht occupies Europe from Norway to the Pyrenees. In the Mediterranean, Mussolini's Italy controls the central position, threatening Britain's lifeline to Egypt, India, and the Far East. The Suez Canal, Britain's strategic jugular, lies within striking distance of Italian air bases. Malta, Britain's only base between Gibraltar and Alexandria, endures relentless bombardment. The Mediterranean has become, in Churchill's words, a sea of troubles. At the heart of Italy's naval power sits the Regia Marina, one of the world's most modern fleets. 6 battleships, 7 heavy cruisers, 14 light cruisers, and dozens of destroyers. Many are brand new, faster and more heavily armed than their British counterparts. The battleships Littorio and Vittorio Veneto are barely a year old, displacing over 40,000 tons, mounting 9 15-inch guns and capable of 30 knots. They are floating fortresses, symbols of fascist might. But there's a problem. The Italian fleet won't fight. Admiral Andrew Brown Cunningham, commanding Britain's Mediterranean fleet from Alexandria, has tried everything to bring the Italians to battle. He's conducted sweeps, laid traps, offered convoys as bait. The Italians sortie, make contact, then flee back to port. They know they hold the central position. They can strike at Malta or Egypt whenever they choose. Why risk their magnificent fleet in a decisive engagement? The strategy is sound, conservative, prudent. It's also driving Cunningham to distraction. The British admiral is a fighter, short, barrel-chested, with a weathered face and piercing eyes. He earned his reputation in the First World War commanding destroyers in seemingly impossible situations. He doesn't do cautious, he doesn't do waiting. If the Italian fleet won't come out and fight, he'll find another way to neutralize it. A way that defies every conventional assumption about naval warfare. The idea originates not with Cunningham, but with Rear Admiral Lumley Lister, commanding the aircraft carrier HMS Illustrious. Lister has been developing the concept since 1938, a mass torpedo attack against ships in harbor. Not just any harbor, but Taranto, the Italian fleet's primary base on the heel of Italy's boot. It's audacious, perhaps insane. Taranto is one of the most heavily defended anchorages in the world. Hundreds of anti-aircraft guns, barrage balloons, searchlights, torpedo nets protecting the battleships, shore batteries that can obliterate any surface ship that ventures within range. But aircraft might slip through, might. The weapon for this desperate gamble is equally improbable: the Fairey Swordfish. To call the Swordfish obsolete is generous. It's a biplane, a throwback to the previous war with fabric-covered wings and an open cockpit. Its top speed is barely 140 miles per hour. Its payload is a single 18-inch torpedo or a handful of bombs. Pilots joke that it's held together with string and good intentions. The Royal Navy officially designates it the torpedo spotter reconnaissance aircraft. The crews call it the string bag, after the mesh bags British housewives use for shopping, because it can carry almost anything and looks like it might fall apart at any moment. Yet this ungainly relic possesses unexpected virtues. It's phenomenally maneuverable. It can take off and land on a carrier deck in conditions that would ground modern aircraft. Its low speed makes it a stable weapons platform. And perhaps most importantly, it's so slow that Italian fire control systems, designed to track fast modern aircraft, struggle to lock onto it. The Swordfish is too primitive to fight effectively in modern warfare, which makes it perfect for this mission. But there's a critical problem that threatens the entire operation before it begins. Torpedoes require depth. The standard British aerial torpedo needs at least 75 feet of water to drop, dive, stabilize, and run. Taranto's outer harbor, the Mar Grande where the battleships anchor, averages only 40 feet deep. Drop a torpedo here and it will plunge straight into the seabed, exploding harmlessly in mud or simply burying itself. Every torpedo expert consulted gives the same answer: it cannot be done unless you modify the torpedoes. The solution comes from brilliant, painstaking work by technicians who probably don't fully understand how crucial their innovations will prove. They fit the torpedoes with specially designed fins and modify the nose pistols to explode on contact rather than beneath the target. They develop dropping procedures that require pilots to fly precisely, approach at exactly 30 feet altitude, release at exactly 1,800 feet from the target, maintain exact speed and attitude. Any deviation and the torpedo tumbles uselessly. It's asking pilots to hit a microscopic window while flying at night, under fire over hostile waters. It's also asking them to fly lower and slower than any sane aviator would consider, making themselves perfect targets for every gun in the harbor. The plan crystallizes in October. HMS Illustrious will carry the strike force. 2 waves of Swordfish will attack, the first targeting the battleships with torpedoes, the second dropping bombs and flares to illuminate targets and create chaos. Intelligence photographs show 6 battleships in the Margrand: Conte di Cavour, Giulio Cesare, Vittorio Veneto, Littorio, Caio Duilio, and Andrea Doria. Sink or cripple even too, and the naval balance in the Mediterranean shifts decisively. The date is set for October 21st, Trafalgar Day, an auspicious anniversary. But fate intervenes. A hangar fire on HMS Illustrious damages several Swordfish. The operation is postponed. New aircraft must be prepared, crews retrain, intelligence photographs are updated. The waiting becomes excruciating. Every day increases the risk that Italian intelligence will detect preparations, that defenses will be strengthened, that the moment will pass. Finally, November 11th is chosen. The date is significant in another way: the anniversary of the armistice that ended the First World War. In that war, Italy fought alongside Britain against the Central Powers. Now, 22 years later, British airmen will strike at their former ally under cover of darkness. The strike force assembles. 24 Swordfish are available, but fuel calculations and deck space limit the attack to 21 aircraft divided into 2 waves. The first wave, 11 aircraft, will launch at 8 p.m. The second wave, 9 aircraft, will follow an hour later. Each Swordfish carries a crew of 2 or 3, pilot, observer, and in some cases a telegraphist air gunner. These are not elite warriors selected from thousands. They're ordinary young men, most barely out of their teens, who've trained for this moment without fully believing it would come. They know the odds. Intelligence estimates Italian defenses include over 200 anti-aircraft guns, 27 barrage balloons, and 90 searchlights. The harbor is protected by boom defenses and torpedo nets. Once the first aircraft attacks, the element of surprise vanishes. Every subsequent aircraft will fly into a firestorm. The question isn't whether some will die. The question is how many will return. November 11, 1940, HMS Illustrious and her escort, including the battleships Malaya, Ramillies, Valiant, and Warspite, along with cruisers and destroyers, steam northwest from Alexandria. The fleet maintains radio silence. To any watching Italian reconnaissance, they appear to be conducting another sweep, another futile attempt to bring the Regia Marina to battle. Nothing unusual, nothing threatening. As darkness falls, Illustrious turns into the wind 40 miles southeast of Taranto. The first wave prepares to launch. Lieutenant Commander Kenneth Williamson, commanding the torpedo strike, climbs into his Swordfish. In the observer's seat behind him sits Lieutenant Norman Scarlett. Their aircraft, designated L4A, carries a torpedo. Williamson is 27 years old, a career naval officer with a reputation for precision flying. Tonight, he'll need every ounce of that skill. The other aircraft prepare. 6 carry torpedoes, 4 carry bombs and flares, 1 carries extra fuel tanks to extend range. The weapons seem pitiful against the might of the Italian fleet. 11 torpedoes, 16 bombs, dozens of flares. It's a mosquito attacking an elephant. But sometimes mosquitoes carry diseases that fell elephants. At 8:40 p.m., the first Swordfish roars down Illustrious's deck and lifts into the night. One by one, the others follow. The launching takes 17 minutes. 1 aircraft develops engine trouble and turns back. 10 continue toward Taranto, spread across the darkness. each crew alone with their thoughts and their fear. The flight takes over an hour. The aircraft fly low, skimming waves, navigating by compass and dead reckoning. There are no radios, no communication between aircraft. Each crew is isolated, committed, heading towards searchlights they can see glowing on the horizon like a malevolent city. At the controls of L4A, Kenneth Williamson watches the lights grow brighter. He studied the photographs until he can visualize every detail of the harbor. The Mar Grande spreads in a rough triangle nearly 4 miles across. The battleships anchor in 2 groups, 3 to the northwest, 3 to the southeast, with overlapping torpedo net protection. The nets extend roughly 400 feet from each ship, creating a barrier beneath the surface. Torpedoes must either leap the nets or find the gaps between them. In daylight, it would be nearly impossible. In darkness, under fire, it seems suicidal. But Williamson doesn't think about suicide. He thinks about approach angles and drop distances. He thinks about the torpedo hanging beneath his aircraft, its modified fins, its contact pistol, its slim chance of working. He thinks about holding altitude at exactly 30 feet while anti-aircraft fire converges on his position. He thinks about his wife waiting in England who doesn't know where he is or what he's attempting. At 10:50 p.m., the Swordfish cross the Italian coast. Immediately, searchlights leap skyward, stabbing through darkness, hunting. The anti-aircraft guns open fire, filling the sky with tracer rounds and shell bursts. The barrage is less intense than expected, a minor mercy. Many guns are positioned to defend against high-altitude attack. The Swordfish, flying barely above the waves, slip beneath their arc. The flare droppers go in first. Lieutenant Clifford Camp roars over the harbor at 4,000 feet, releasing his magnesium flares. They ignite, brilliant white light flooding downward, turning night into harsh, shadowless day. The battleships appear below, dark shapes against dark water, suddenly illuminated. The torpedo nets glisten. The anti-aircraft fire intensifies, converging on Kemp's aircraft. He banks away, shells bursting around him, heading for the second flare drop point. Williamson begins his approach. He drops to 30 feet so low that spray from his slipstream wets the observer's face. The battleship Conte di Cavour lies ahead, massive and vulnerable, her guns firing upward at shapes in the night. Williamson's approach is perfect, textbook, the culmination of months of training. 1,800 feet from the target, he releases the torpedo. For one frozen second, nothing happens. Then the torpedo drops, hits the water, dives. Williamson's Swordfish climbs away, every gun in the harbor tracking it. Tracer rounds slice the night. Shells burst so close the aircraft shudders. Williamson throws the Swordfish into violent, evasive maneuvers, the wings flexing, the engine screaming. Behind him, beneath the surface of Taranto harbor, the torpedo runs true. It strikes Conte di Cavour below the waterline, detonating with tremendous force. Water and fragments blast upward. The battleship shudders. Damage control parties race to respond, but the hit is catastrophic. Water floods in, overwhelming pumps, pulling the 30,000-ton warship lower in the shallow harbor. She's mortally wounded, though it will take hours for the crew to realize their ship is dying. Williamson doesn't see the hit. He's fighting to escape the firestorm, flying barely above the water, searchlights tracking him, shells exploding in his wake. His Swordfish is hit multiple times. The fabric wings tear. The engine coughs. But the ancient biplane keeps flying, keeps climbing, keeps struggling toward the darkness beyond the harbor defenses. Then a shell finds them. The explosion tears through the fuselage. The engine dies. The Swordfish falls from the sky, crashing into the Mar Piccolo, the smaller inner harbor. Williamson and Scarlett survive the crash, swimming to shore. Italian sailors pull them from the water. The leader of the first wave becomes the attack's first prisoner, dragged from the water while his torpedo wreaks havoc on the Italian fleet. But Williamson's sacrifice creates opportunity. The anti-aircraft fire concentrates on his escape route, creating a gap for the following aircraft. Lieutenant Neil Kemp dives toward the battleship Littorio, newest and most powerful ship in the Italian fleet. He releases at point-blank range, pulling up so hard the Swordfish nearly stalls. The torpedo runs, strikes, explodes. Littorio shudders from the impact. Damage control parties report flooding, but the ship is huge, modern, designed to absorb punishment. One torpedo won't sink her. She's wounded, not dead. Lieutenant Michael Torrance Spence approaches from a different angle, Also targeting Littorio, the searchlights find him, holding him in their glare, making the Swordfish a perfect target. Every gun that can depress far enough fires at him. The air around his aircraft becomes solid with steel and fire. But Torrens Spence holds his course, holds his altitude, releases his torpedo at the optimal point. It strikes Littorio's starboard side. The second torpedo hit on the massive battleship. Water floods in, overwhelming pumps, dragging her lower. Torrens Spence climbs away into the darkness, his Swordfish trailing smoke, fabric torn but still flying. Somehow, impossibly, he's alive. The first wave continues its assault. Lieutenant Charles Lea targets the battleship Caio Duilio, releasing his torpedo in a perfect attack run. The explosion tears into Duilio's hull below the waterline. The battleship begins listing immediately. Lieutenant Harold Swain attacks another battleship, but his torpedo misses, running beneath the torpedo nets. The bomber aircraft drop their loads on cruisers and shore installations, adding to the chaos. 10 minutes. That's how long the first wave's attack lasts. 10 minutes of concentrated fury, of torpedoes striking, bombs exploding, flares illuminating carnage. Then the surviving Swordfish scatter into the darkness, racing for Illustrious, leaving behind a harbor in chaos. Italian damage control parties work frantically. 3 battleships are hit: Conte di Cavour, Littorio, and Caio Duilio. The extent of damage isn't immediately clear, but officers know they're in trouble. Water floods in faster than pumps can expel it. The shallow harbor that was supposed to protect the fleet now traps the damaged battleships, preventing them from maneuvering to deeper water where better buoyancy might save them. And the British aren't finished. The second wave launches from Illustrious an hour after the first. 9 Swordfish, carrying 5 torpedoes and 4 bomb loads, navigate through the darkness toward a harbor now fully alert and enraged. The Italian gunners know what's coming. The searchlights sweep constantly. The anti-aircraft batteries are at maximum readiness. The barrage balloons have been raised to maximum height, creating a lethal obstacle course above the harbor. The second wave crews know they're flying into hell. Lieutenant John Wellham leads the torpedo strikers. His target is Vittorio Veneto, sister ship to Littorio, anchored in the outer harbor. As he approaches the coast, the anti-aircraft fire begins, heavier than the first wave experienced. The Italians are ready now, angry, determined to exact revenge. Wellham presses his attack, diving toward the harbor, searchlights tracking him, shells bursting continuously. He releases his torpedo and banks hard, climbing, seeking darkness. The torpedo misses. Vittorio Veneto is unscathed. Lieutenant Gerald Bailey attacks Vittorio Veneto from a different angle, hoping to catch her in a pincer. He roars in at minimum altitude, releases, climbs. His torpedo also misses, foiled by the torpedo nets or perhaps by the violent, evasive maneuvering the battleship's captain orders despite being at anchor. Vittorio Veneto escapes unscathed, the only battleship to do so. But Lieutenant John Wellings finds Littorio. Already wounded from the first wave, he releases his torpedo, adding a third hit to the battleship. Water floods in through multiple breaches. Littorio begins settling deeper into the harbor. Her captain orders counter-flooding to prevent capsizing, deliberately flooding compartments on the opposite side to maintain balance. It keeps her upright but accelerates the sinking. She settles onto the harbor bottom, her decks awash, a modern battleship reduced to a stationary battery. The bomber aircraft add to the destruction. They target cruisers and destroyers in the inner harbor, hitting the destroyer Libeccio and several smaller vessels. Fuel tanks explode, fires rage. The harbor becomes an inferno of flame and smoke and desperate damage control efforts. Lieutenant Charles Lamb, flying the last torpedo attack of the night, makes his run on Caio Duilio, already hit in the first wave. His torpedo strikes true, a second devastating blow to the battleship. Duilio lists heavily, settling deeper. Her captain orders the crew to abandon critical compartments. Like Littorio, she's sinking in shallow water, settling onto the bottom rather than plunging into the depths. The second wave completes its attack and turns for home. Behind them, Taranto burns. 3 battleships are sinking, others are damaged. Destroyers and cruisers burn at their moorings. Oil slicks spread across the harbor, catching fire, creating vast sheets of flame. Smoke rises thousands of feet into the night sky, visible for miles. The cost to the British: 2 aircraft lost, 4 crew members killed or captured. Williamson and Scarlett are prisoners. Lieutenant Gerald Bailey's Swordfish is shot down during his escape. He and his crew perish in the crash. One other aircraft crashes on return to Illustrious, the crew rescued. The cost to Italy: half their battleship strength crippled in a single night. When dawn breaks over Taranto, the full extent of the disaster becomes clear. Conte di Cavour has capsized, her hull breaking the surface at a grotesque angle. Littorio and Caio Duilio rest on the bottom, their superstructures above water but their fighting capability destroyed. A fourth battleship is damaged by near misses. Cruisers and destroyers bear scars from bomb hits. The harbor itself is chaos: wreckage, oil slicks, bodies floating among the debris. In Rome, Mussolini receives the news with fury and disbelief. Half his battle line destroyed by obsolete biplanes? Impossible. Yet the reconnaissance photographs don't lie. His admirals promise repairs, promise the battleships will return to service, but they know the truth. Conte di Cavour will never sail again. Littorio and Duilio will require months in dry dock, months Italy doesn't have, resources Italy can't spare. In Alexandria, Admiral Cunningham receives the strike report with barely contained exultation. The Mediterranean balance has shifted overnight. The Italian fleet, once superior in numbers, is now decisively inferior. They cannot challenge British control of the central Mediterranean. Malta can be resupplied. Convoys to Egypt can sail with reduced escort. The Regia Marina will spend the rest of the war avoiding battle, not seeking it. But the implications extend far beyond the Mediterranean. In Tokyo, Japanese naval officers study reports of the Taranto attack with intense interest. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, commander of the combined fleet, examines every detail. The Japanese have been developing their own plan for a surprise attack on the American Pacific Fleet anchored at Pearl Harbor. Many officers argue it's impossible. The harbor is too shallow for aerial torpedoes. The defenses are too strong. The Americans will detect the approach. Taranto proves them wrong. Taranto demonstrates that modified torpedoes can work in shallow water. That night attack can achieve surprise. That even heavily defended harbors are vulnerable. That obsolete aircraft flown with courage and skill can sink battleships. Yamamoto orders his staff to study the British attack in forensic detail. What worked? What failed? How can Japanese tactics improve on the British model? The Japanese have better aircraft than the Swordfish. Their torpedoes are superior. Their pilots are extensively trained. If the British achieved this much with 21 obsolete biplanes, what could Japan accomplish with modern carrier aircraft? 13 months later, the world learns the answer. On December 7, 1941, Japanese aircraft swarm over Pearl Harbor, their torpedoes modified using principles learned from Taranto. They sink or damage 8 battleships, achieving in 2 hours what some thought would require months of surface combat. The attack forces America into World War II, reshaping the conflict, ultimately dooming Japan. But in that moment of terrible success, the Japanese are following a blueprint written in Italian blood and British courage over Taranto Harbor. The Taranto attack revolutionizes naval warfare in ways that extend far beyond its immediate tactical success. For centuries, battleships have dominated naval thinking. They are the capital ships, the measure of naval power, the queens of the chessboard. Admirals build strategy around battleship engagements. Nations bankrupt themselves constructing these floating fortresses. Taranto demonstrates that battleships, however powerful, are vulnerable to aircraft. A single torpedo from a fabric-covered biplane can cripple a warship that cost millions and took years to build. The equation is devastating. Aircraft carriers, which cost less than battleships and carry vulnerable aircraft, can destroy battleships at ranges battleship guns cannot reach. The naval hierarchy inverts overnight. The British don't fully grasp the implications. They see Taranto as a tactical victory, not a strategic revolution. The Royal Navy continues building battleships throughout the war, but the Americans and Japanese understand. The Pacific War becomes a carrier war. Battleships, when they appear, serve as anti-aircraft platforms protecting the carriers relegated to supporting roles. The Swordfish crews who executed the attack receive recognition, though not the public fame they deserve. The attack remains classified for months. When details finally emerge, they're overshadowed by other events. by defeats in North Africa and the Atlantic, by the Japanese rampage across the Pacific. The pilots who risked everything over Taranto become footnotes, their incredible courage absorbed into the larger narrative of the war. But the Italians never forget. Admiral Inigo Campioni, commanding the fleet at Taranto, is relieved of command, scapegoated for the disaster. Italian naval morale, already fragile, collapses. The psychological wound proves as devastating as the physical damage. The Regia Marina, which began the war confident in its superiority, spends the remainder of the conflict paralyzed by fear of British carriers. Major operations are cancelled, opportunities are lost. The fleet that should have dominated the Mediterranean becomes a prisoner in its own harbors. Conte di Cavour, raised from the harbor bottom months after the attack, never returns to service. She sits incomplete in Trieste until Italy's surrender in 1943, then is scuttled to prevent German capture. Littorio and Caio Duilio are eventually repaired, but the months required for repairs keep them out of action during crucial periods. When they finally return to service, they operate tentatively, afraid of repeating Taranto's nightmare. The Swordfish, that improbable instrument of revolution, continues serving throughout the war. The Navy tries to replace it with modern aircraft, but the Swordfish proves irreplaceable. It sinks submarines, attacks German battleships, flies from escort carriers protecting Atlantic convoys. At the war's end, the Swordfish remains in frontline service, a biplane from 1934 still operational in 1945, outlasting many supposedly superior aircraft. Kenneth Williamson, shot down leading the first wave, survives Italian captivity and returns to Britain after the war. He retires as a commander, his name largely unknown outside naval circles, though he led one of history's most significant air attacks. The other pilots and crews scattered to different postings, different battles, carrying the memory of that November night when they changed naval warfare forever. The attack on Taranto stands as one of the most decisive strikes in military history. 21 obsolete aircraft flying from a single carrier neutralized half of Italy's battleship fleet and shifted the strategic balance in an entire theater of war. The psychological impact extended even further, demonstrating that aircraft carriers were the new capital ships, that naval aviation had surpassed surface gunnery as the dominant form of naval warfare. And exactly 13 months later, Japanese aircraft proved the lesson again over Pearl Harbor, using tactics learned from studying Taranto, achieving results that reshaped the world. The men who flew Swordfish biplanes through the firestorm over an Italian harbor couldn't have imagined the chain of consequences they'd unleashed. They were simply trying to survive, to complete their mission, to damage the enemy and return to their carrier. They succeeded beyond measure. In doing so, they wrote the blueprint for modern naval warfare, demonstrated courage that redefined the possible, and proved that sometimes the most obsolete weapons in the most desperate hands can change the course of history. The night sky over Taranto, lit by searchlights and exploding shells, illuminated not just Italian battleships but the future of naval combat. And in that future, the age of the battleship was over, ended by young men flying fabric-covered biplanes into impossible odds and emerging victorious.